Hey, it's Flango again, and today I'm going to talk to you about kings, openers, and Wincons. So I guess we'll start with Sturm's deck again, because it won a tournament, and it's not too... Everyone should be pretty familiar with this. I've referenced it in the past. Now, um, let's see. King, we'll start with king. So what makes a good king? Now, if you have any sort of terrain game plan, like a swamp or an ocean, Bog Dweller is great, right? Because it's good on swamp and ocean. It's got a lot of health. It's got good attack, and it regens. And the regeneration we'll get into a little bit later. But there's other kings, like Desire's Guardian, for example. Doesn't have to do with terrain, but it's still a very strong card. Although it did get nerfed. Yeah, Ravenous 8 now. And there's so many other kings. I mean, Vampire Progenitor isn't a bad king. Vampire Unleashed is a king. I don't know, a Dream Drake is a king. Basically, a good king is something that has a lot of health, so that your opponent, like it beats aggro if it has a lot of health, right? Has good movement, has good attack. Basically, a stat stick is a good king. That's what makes Dream Drake good, because your king is free, right? So anything with a high cost, if I go sort by cost, obviously not a good king, but good king. No, because it hurts itself, but like, we could work it. Acceptable king. It's got really low health though, so probably don't use it. Not without like barrier and stuff. Good king. Good king. Fine king. Used to be one of the best kings. That's got bad movement. It's okay. Fine. Good king. Good king. Good king. Well, this one's complicated. Anyways, do I need to go through all the cards? Basically, expensive cards are good kings. You don't usually want to have a free card be your king because free cards have bad stats and they don't they don't they don't do anything special, right? Um, so yeah, that sort of gets kings out of the way. That's why he chose Bog Dweller. That's why the next deck I'm going to show you chose Bog Dweller. Now, openers. So whenever you're designing a deck, you need to understand what you're going to do in the first few turns of the game. Obviously, free cards are good openers, but Great Monarch, for example, is not a turn one play. You don't play this card unless it's going to be healing that turn, because then it becomes a target for your opponent, which this deck can handle, but still, it's not at all desirable. So what are openers in this deck? Well, we're looking at cards that are free and that are good on an empty board. So that's Ephemeral Garden, because Ephemeral Garden is good when it gets to stay alive. That's Cloning Seeds, you'll notice, isn't an opener, right? Because it's not good on an empty board. Wraithblade, that's good on an empty board. And Swamp, I've talked about this a little bit in the past, but it's acceptable on an empty board. You don't really, especially with Bog Dweller, like Swamp turn 1 isn't going to let you hit your opponent, right? And that is the other thing I was going to talk about. Your opener should highly depend on your king. If your king can reach the opponent in one turn, then you are in a position where it is good and you are incentivized to run minions as your openers, because you can hit your opponent, stop right in front of them, and place a minion and hit them again, right? 2 attacks for free, turn 1. Or turn 2, if they've developed, you can still get to your opponent, if you have like Dream Drake, for example. Although Dream Drake doesn't stop in front of the opponent, so Dream Drake, you're incentivized to poke your opponent and play a card. But yeah, so the idea is your opener should be influenced by how your king moves. Now, Bog Dweller, we don't know how our king moves, right? It might move 4, so we can go right in front of our opponent, or it might move 2. So we're just going to be positioning ourselves probably to get onto a swamp or an ocean. So yeah, that's sort of how this deck approaches openers. It just says, I want mana, and I want attack, right? Because this deck, Wincon. Okay, we're going to talk about Wincon now. Your Wincon can be one of many things. It can be swarm, develop, get board control. Once you have board control, then you can start to hit them from all angles and start to do lots of damage in one turn. And you can deny them from playing cards, right? I mean, it's hard to lose when you have 9 minions and they have 1. You can go for attrition, lots of attacks. That's what this deck sort of does. It hits them with a Bog Dweller, it hits them with another Bog Dweller, it hits them with another Bog Dweller. It's a dueling deck. And it heals itself up, and it just wins like mid-game sort of value duels, right? You can't kill Bog Dweller when it has a barrier. When it has a second Bog Dweller, because that's an amazing card, Cloning Seeds will give you one. Well, not anymore. New patch, Cloning Seeds doesn't work. This deck doesn't work in the new patch. So maybe I should switch to another deck after this. But yeah, the idea is that it hits the opponent. It's not like a rush down aggro deck, but it hits the opponent. And then that's the other way. You can ignore their minions completely. You won't play Wraithblade or anything. Well, you might sell for the buff, but you ignore your opponents completely, and you just hit them, hit them, hit them. And that would be a deck like a Chimera could do that. Where is Chimera? Chimera, straight line 4, first turn you can go to them and hit them with a unit, probably like a Swamp Terror. That's this thing. It's 8 damage, puts them on a swamp so that your Chimera can do more damage next turn. Right? So your king is going to influence your Wincon and your opener. A Northern Giant King, well, maybe a Desirous Guardian King, has to mana turn 1, right? So it can't play aggressive openers. It has to play for shoot. It has to play for controlling the map from a disadvantage. It has to play for like retaking the map. Dream Drake can poke the opponent turn 1. So that's good for a rushdown strat. You can poke the opponent turn 1 or go right next to them and play a unit. Shenlong has to burst turn 1, so that's not a good aggro king. Volcano's a good swarm king because it just spawns lava golems. So this is a good board control king. Yeah, so that's sort of, there's some straight line cards, but I don't have any on me. I don't think. That just go to the end and hit the opponent's king turn 1. Yeah, the best I have is straight line 4. Anyways, just trust me that there are some cards that will be good kings that will just hit the opponent turn 1. They're good for aggro. Okay, let's move on to one more deck. But we're already close to done. What deck do I want to show you? Okay, so the reason I use this is because this is in place of Zera, who should be in this deck, but I don't own him yet. Sure, let's show you this. Alright, this deck is kind of old. So I ran like one of everything because I only had one of everything. But let's talk openers again. I'm running let's show you not Bog Dweller, sorry. Sure, let's show you this deck. Now this deck isn't mine, I shouldn't. Like it's okay, I'm gonna show it to you. Okay, so this is not my idea. Somebody else told me that Obelisk can be revived by Necromancer, and then you have Crystal Sage permanently alive. It's not a super great combo, but it's okay. Now we've got Crystal Sage King, so we have to work around that. How do we do that? Well, Crystal Sage, he's like Volcano, he spawns things. He's going for board control. But the rest of our game plan has to work around that, right? So I chose to put in, for openers, Castle Knight. Because Castle Knight thins out my deck. You'll notice it's at 22. So that makes the rest of my deck more stable. It also plays two 15/6s for 0 mana, which is great. and it defends my Crystal Sages, and it works on my Swarm sort of playstyle where you play 2 creatures. Other cards I chose to put in were Soul Collector. That's a good opener. If I'm swarming, things are going to die. Soul Collector is good. It's also a mage, which means I can use Knowledge to give Crystal Sages buffs to Soul Collector. Or to give Necromancer's Resurrect to Soul Collector. Necromancer is not an opener in this deck because what's it doing turn 1? It doesn't resurrect anything, right? So basically think about what cards are you going to be bringing out turn 1, right? And always have 3 to 6. Remember when we were looking at our hypergeometric calculator, we had, 19 cards, number of successes, let's say we have 5, right? You want to put about 5 openers in your deck. That could be 3 of one, 2 of another. And we're getting 4 cards. Oh, sorry, we're drawing 4 cards turn 1. There's 5 successes in our population. We're looking for 1, right? Just to have 1 opener, you have about a 50% chance. Okay. Now to have 2, that's another 23. But still, to have greater than 1 opener, you have a 20% chance. So you're looking at well, I guess this is what I want. You're looking at about a 74% chance to have one of your openers if you run 5. Now, I like to run 6. Gives me about an 80% chance. But it's always important to consider, like, how happy are you if you miss turn 1, right? So a deck like Crystal Sage isn't missing out on any aggro, so that's okay if it misses turn 1. But still, like, you want to have some openers in your deck, right? They increase your win rate. So that's where the Castle Knight comes in, even though some people might not play this card in this archetype because it doesn't have anything to do with the archetype. It's just a nice opener for a deck that doesn't really have openers. Like, what else is there? Obelisk. Obelisk is an opener. But it doesn't need to be, right? You don't need to play Obelisk until your Sage is low. If you play Obelisk, now they can just hit it. So there's some trade-offs that happen. Same thing with Plague. Obviously, Plague isn't an opener. So yeah, this is my sort of take on how you take a deck with no openers, add one. It just makes the deck a lot better. So that's kind of it for this series, I think. Wincons we talked about. Remember to think about what kind of opener you want in your deck, and remember to play to your Wincon in every way that you possibly can. Thank you for listening.